Hello everyone, and welcome to my session, How Unit Costs Will Change the Way You Think About Your Cloud Bill. Super excited that you have chosen to spend this amount of time with me, and I hope you learn a little something from this talk. So just to give you a little preview about what we're going to be talking about, basically having visibility into your spend is really just the beginning. So what it comes down to is, what do you actually want to be able to do with this visibility? Like, what is this visibility enabling? So by the end of this talk, I'm hoping that you'll have the tools you need in order to utilize unit metrics at all level of your business and its spend. Also, I just want to put it out there that this is a kind of, I guess, more advanced FinOps talk, although not really advanced, but more in terms of you need more of a solid FinOps foundation before you get into this sort of stuff. So if you're at the point where you already have things like tagging that is sufficient in your organization, as well as cost reports set up on a per team basis, as well as the FinOps function that supports all of this and reviewing it on a regular basis, if you have all of that in place, you can then start thinking about unit metrics. If not, you kind of want to work on that solid foundation before you really get into this. But still, if you watch this, I figure it'll be good because it'll provide kind of like a lodestar for you to focus on when you are building this stuff out. So before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Hello, my name is Dan, and I am the Director of Community at Vantage. Vantage is a cloud cost visibility and analysis tool that enables FinOps practices. Previously, I was the first FinOps hire at Datadog, as well as the first FinOps hire at FullStory. I've since moved over to Vantage in a Director of Community role because I like doing stuff like this. I'm based in downtown Brooklyn in New York City, lived in New York since 2004 or so. And outside of FinOps, I'm an avid movie watcher. I love movies. I also read a lot. I was an English major way back in the day. And a playwright. I actually have 2 full-length plays that have been produced. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself. So cost reports are great, but have you ever thought about actionable cost reports? And what I mean by this is, when you get a cost report, do you know if you need to take action or not? And when you're designing cost reports for other people or for other teams, are you able to remove as many steps as possible in order to make that cost report actionable? So you want to have as few steps as possible between when you're looking at the information and whether you know if you need to do something about it. So having a cost dashboard is great, but you're still one step away from actionable information. At the end of the day, all of your costs are either justified or not justified. That's it. If you got a cost spike, you have a cost anomaly, it's going to be one or the other. One, you don't need to do anything about it. You're totally fine. You're like, okay, well, we had a cost anomaly, but it's expected. There's a reason for it, or it's not justified, in which case you know what the reason is, or you need to do an investigation to figure out what the reason is. So if your goal is at a glance to have these costs be either justified or not justified, simply having a cost dashboard, while useful, is still a few steps away from understanding whether that information is actionable or not. We need to figure out whether this cost increase or whether the projection is justified or not. And there's so many different reasons why cost could increase or decrease over time. It's going to be impossible to cover all the bases in a single report, but using unit metrics, you can definitely take away what is most likely going to be the first investigative step when you get a cost anomaly or there is something that you can't explain in the cost report. So most people are familiar with company-wide key performance indicators. This is kind of where you identify a single KPI for your entire company. Examples could be cost per customer, cost per session, cost per stream. These are kind of at a high level of what your business is doing, how you can measure the costs. But what unit metrics does is it enables you to build these key performance indicators at much more granular parts of the business. So for example, if you have an individual microservice, let's say the microservice ingests logs, don't you want to see those costs per log ingested? Same, if you have an application that's enriching data, it would be great to see the cost per enrichment. And likewise, if you are ingesting cost reports like Vantage does, what are the cost of that ingestion engine, so just that piece, per cost report ingested. Speaking of Vantage, I want to go into the details here and kind of show you an example of what this looks like, and we're going to use Vantage as an example here. So Vantage, as you might know or you might not know, is a cost visibility tool. So it ingests cost reports from all of these different vendors, and it shows those costs back to users, among other things. So along with AWS, GCP, Azure, it's Fastly, Databricks, Datadog, New Relic, all of these different things. We take those cost reports and we make it into one kind of platform single pane of glass. So some company-wide KPIs that we might want to keep track of would say cost per customer. Really basic one, like what is our average cost per customer, and how is that changing over time? But yeah, this is a high-level indicator, but isn't necessarily useful on a more granular level, especially because some customers will have more connections than others. It kind of varies. So having that average and tracking that could be thrown off once we onboard some big customer that's doing something kind of unique and isn't necessarily useful for individual teams building individual services. So at Vantage, there are several different internal applications that kind of do one thing each. So we have a piece of the product that ingests cost reports, right? We have another piece of the product that is going to analyze and enrich that data. Then another piece that's going to store the data, another piece that's going to retrieve the data. If you're familiar with application architecture, this is going to be familiar, and you probably know what this looks like for your business as well. It's MVP, it's different microservices all talking to each other. It's kind of standard. And really, the best way to view your costs is going to be split down by these internal applications. So if you have a FinOps practice going already, you probably have a report that shows your cost for these individual pieces. And it's possible that given the size of your team, you probably have a team that is dedicated to, say, ingestion, or a team that's dedicated to like your core analysis, so on and so forth. And you're going to have cost reports for these individual teams. And ideally, the individual engineers are going to have ownership over those costs. So the first level of visibility, what you want to set up with a FinOps practice is this level of visibility. Like, do the teams know what their applications are costing the company? So if we dive in a little bit further, let's take a look at the ingestion team, right? So this is a cost report, very simple for the ingestion team, and they own the piece of the Vantage application that is ingesting cost reports. So if we look at this, we can see that each month it has some growth, but in May compared to April, it's bigger, right? It's about a 20% growth in April to May versus maybe like 5 to 10 in the previous months. So this is something that we're like, oh no, this is a cost anomaly. We need to do an investigation. We need to figure out what is behind this cost jump. So if we have unit metrics set up, we can build a report that looks more like this. So you can see I've added, it's about $1.14 per thousand cost reports ingested on average for this time. And you can see this line showing how that shifts over time. So even though there's a cost spike in May, it's slightly down from April. And then I can learn that, okay, that means in May, in addition to spending more, we've had significantly more cost reports ingested. This could be indicative of onboarding more customers, and maybe those customers are connecting a higher than average amount of cost reports. So really, by looking at this chart at a glance, one, I know that the anomaly is not something I need to worry about, and two, it's a cause for celebration rather than a cause for worry. And I can tell that at a glance for the ingestion team in general. Now, can you imagine if you had this view for every single part of your business or your application? Let's say you're doing data enrichment. If you had those costs per number of enrichments, or log ingestion, you're ingesting logs per log ingested, right? All of these different unit metrics are things that you could theoretically set up with individual parts of your business. Now, it's important to keep in mind too, if you are a centralized FinOps practitioner or team, you might not know what that metric is that those costs should scale against. And therefore, it's important to work with the engineering teams, the people that own those costs, to understand what the costs should scale against. And also, I would recommend, if you are looking to set this up, to kind of get a view in a cost report that shows all of your individual applications and sort them by the highest cost to lowest cost, and use that as the order to tackle these. If you start with the top 10, so to speak, and figure out what metric each of those costs should scale against, and most likely there'll be a lot of duplicates in that top 10, you can set this up and then generate reports to show those teams the costs in context with the actual metrics underlying it, so that they can know at a glance whether their costs are justified. And you can definitely save a lot of time and headache with cost anomalies and investigations. Great. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Dan, I'm with Vantage, and thanks for watching.